In the late 1990s, newspapers were filled with stories of men and women in California who were sentenced to life in prison for misdemeanor offenses. The most well-known case involved Jerry Williams, the man who received 25 years to life for stealing a single slice of pizza. These strict prison sentences came because of the 3 strikes and you're out law, a law that was pushed to California voters in 1994 because of a man named Douglas Walker. Douglas Walker was born in Fresno, California in 1965. His childhood years became public record when he was first arrested at the age of 13 for inhaling paint fumes. That same year, he was arrested again for selling heroin. And before the age of 18, he'd been arrested 3 more times for being drunk in public, petty theft, and drug dealing. Documents from his arrests noted Walker as being a drug user who supported his habit through crimes. As he got older, he continued in that same direction, spending most of his years going in and out of jail. By the time Douglas Walker was 26, he was a full-time heroin user. And on a night in June 1992, he and another man went out on a mission to find money for drugs. The men came across 18-year-old Kimber Reynolds, who was leaving a bar in Fresno. In an attempt to rob her, they pulled up on a stolen motorcycle and grabbed her purse. Startled, she struggled slightly. This angered the man who was with Douglas Walker, and he pulled out a .357 Magnum, put it to the side of Kimber Reynolds' head, and in front of a crowd of people, pulled the trigger. They then fled on the stolen motorcycle, leaving her purse behind. Kimber Reynolds died in a hospital 26 hours later. Because the shooting happened in front of so many witnesses, it didn't take long to identify Douglas Walker and the shooter, Joseph Davis. Joseph Davis was a hardcore meth user who'd been in and out of jail for drug and gun charges. On the day he shot Kimber Reynolds, he'd been out of jail less than 3 months. When police went to arrest Joseph Davis for the shooting, he refused to be arrested and shot at officers from his apartment doorway. After a short standoff, he was killed by police. The next day, Douglas Walker surrendered to the Fresno Police Department. He was initially charged with murder, but in his defense, he told his attorneys that he and Joseph Davis were both high on heroin when they tried to steal the purse, and that he didn't know Davis was armed or that he was going to shoot Kimber Reynolds. After his statements, prosecutors reviewed his case and offered him a plea deal. Walker accepted the deal and was convicted of being an accessory to murder and attempted robbery. He was sentenced to 9 years, eligible for parole in 4.5. Douglas Walker's prison sentence outraged Kimber Reynolds' family, and her father, Mike Reynolds, set out to change California laws regarding those who repeatedly commit crimes. Mike Reynolds wanted a law that would keep ex-convicts off the street. There had, however, already been laws in the United States that imposed longer prison sentences on people with more than 1 criminal conviction. But there wasn't, at that time, a California law that specifically targeted repeat offenders. Mike Reynolds argued that if there had been, Douglas Walker and Joseph Davis wouldn't have been out of prison and could not have shot his daughter. So that's what he set out to change with the 3 strikes and you're out law, an expression taken from baseball. This new law would mean that a defendant would receive a strike for a serious or violent felony. 2 strikes and the prison sentence would double. And a 3rd strike, regardless of the crime's violence or severity, would result in a sentence of 25 years to life. His first attempt to get 3 strikes into legislation got rejected, so he started a citizens' petition to force a public vote. He needed 600,000 signatures to get 3 strikes on the ballot, and he almost didn't get it. But in 1993, another man with a long criminal record, Richard Allen Davis, was arrested for the killing of 12-year-old Polly Klaas. And those remaining signatures that were needed came pouring in. 3 strikes and you're out was passed and went into effect at midnight on March 8, 1994. 9 hours later, a homeless man named Lester Wallace, who had 2 nonviolent burglaries on his record, attempted to steal a car radio. He went to court and got 25 years to life. A little over 2 years later, Douglas Walker was released from prison. He walked out of prison early, but he walked out with 2 strikes.
Douglas Walker. He served 2 years of his sentence as an accessory to the murder of Kimber Reynolds. The death, you'll recall, which set off the 3 strikes crusade.
There's not a day that goes by I don't feel remorse for what happened to that girl. But, there's nothing I can do to change that.
You feel like you can be a productive person outside?
I know I can.
Law-abiding?
Law-abiding.
6 years later, in 2003, Walker was arrested and convicted again for stealing a tool chest. He could have received his 3rd strike and 25 years to life, but the judge on the case called it a low-level crime and instead sentenced him to 12 years. After serving 10, he was released in 2013, and 3 months later, he was arrested again for domestic violence. This time, the judge wasn't so lenient. The judge determined that Walker was a career criminal. Not only had he been in and out of jail his whole life, he'd also joined the Fresneck Street Gang, a white gang in Fresno, California, closely affiliated with the Aryan Brotherhood. In the judge's opinion, Douglas Walker had no plans to change and would most likely commit more crimes in the future. So 19 years after his crimes were used to pass the 3 strikes law, 48-year-old Douglas Walker was struck out, sentenced to 44 years to life after receiving his 3rd strike for domestic violence. Kimber Reynolds' father was in the courtroom the day the verdict was read. Over the years, case after case has caused debates over the effectiveness of the 3 strikes law. Those in protest of the law cite cases like Leandro Andrade, a 9-year Army vet who stole 5 children's videotapes from Kmart and was sentenced to 50 years. But there are also those in support of 3 strikes, who cite the thousands of cases where the law took violent and dangerous individuals off the streets. In an attempt to make 3 strikes and you're out more balanced, an adjustment to the law was passed in 2012. The new law now states that in order to be classified as a 3rd strike and receive a life sentence, the offense must be a serious or violent felony. But even with these changes, the arguments over the law's effectiveness still continue. But the one thing everyone does agree on is that the 3 strikes law, inspired by Douglas Walker, changed the California legal system forever.